Okay, boomer. One of the greatest sayings to come out of the mouths of Gen Z. Or are they actually called Zoomers? Personally, being the millennial who just hit level 30 of the MMO game called Life, I've been seeing how the world of gaming has finally hit its mainstream stride. Now, I mean this in the oldest person's voice possible, but back in my day, gaming was hard to enter. You needed either a console, computer know-how. Those were the two prerequisites. I grew up watching my dad play games on the computer, but personally, I do think that was a privilege because he started a career in IT when I was born, so it was his quarter life crisis change. But either way, today's question is, should you play modern boomer shooters? And I think before we can even begin to answer that question, we need to figure out what the hell is a boomer shooter to begin with. For my millennial and Gen X squad, we all know what a boomer shooter is, even if we haven't heard the term before. Boomer shooters are the original first-person shooter games. Fast-paced movement, shooting, and honestly, nothing about the movement, mechanics, hell, even the point of view is supposed to be realistic. I mean, look at how the guy from Doom holds his gun. So, some of the earliest forefathers of modern gaming are these games. These are the games like Doom, Quake, Wolfenstein, and Duke Nukem 3D. A boomer shooter prioritized gameplay and an easily followable, non-descriptive storyline. And of course, speed. These games were fast-moving. So through this simple yet creative gameplay loop, these shooters all had similar things in common. The game had guns, lots and lots of enemies, color-keyed doorways that would force the player to find the same colored key to then open the door so they could advance through the level, and of course, guns. Or, I should say weapons. And they didn't require any additional aiming. If you would click your mouse in the direction of the enemy, the bullets are going to hit their target. There was no real Z-axis. So, looking back in history and seeing the devices programmers were designing to and their limitations, a lot of these choices made sense. From memory to the storage requirements, you couldn't add too much to a game without it becoming impossible to handle on the machine's hardware. Or honestly, it would just be too expensive to sell and ship. I mean, even in my light digging on the internet and the forums of the original Doom, from 1993, the releases were allegedly between 3 to 5 floppy disks, and that's just random forum posters who were discussing what they remembered when they were going to finally get their CD copy of the game during its re-releases. And these games were all success stories. They created generations of gamers and programmers that led into the shooters that we see today. From Call of Duty, Half-Life, to even the modern versions of Doom Eternal, we see the influences from 30 years ago. First-person shooters were meant to be fast, fun, explosive, and at the time, very controversial. Doom was violence unleashed that people had never seen before. It had satanic imagery that the media outlets claimed would turn the youth into serial killers. Duke Nukem brought inappropriate humor and nudity to gaming, which in hindsight is probably some of the earlier controversies painting gaming culture as highly perverted people that are also shut-ins. Besides that fact, how do they hold up? Personally, I think they do. Many of these games fall under shareware, and if you are the type of person that would enjoy an old movie and doesn't mind seeing outdated visual effects just to see what revolutionized an industry, I would highly suggest diving into these games, which are free to play these days. They're a little cumbersome, you might need to follow a guide or step-by-step procedures or run a programming compatibility mode, but it is doable, and hey, it's free, so you putting in 15 minutes of work probably is the payment for entry. But here's the thing. Boomer shooters haven't stopped being made. There's a whole demographic of gamers that still enjoy this gameplay loop. Although simplistic, the games lend themselves to a very fun time. And as long as you don't dive into the extreme difficulty settings or mods, most people will enjoy seeing the end of a level screen with all of their stats being recorded on the screen, and the rush of killing all the bad guys that are facing them down. So today I wanted to dive into what has been happening to boomer shooters these past few years and see if they're worth playing. So what I ended up doing was I played 3 games that fell into this category. 2 of them are actually mods that are built off of the Doom 2 engine, so you'll need a copy of Doom 2 to play them. And they're built by either a small team or even an individual developer that put their free time into this game so that you can play it. And the third game is call it fully developed game by Auroch Digital, and it's published by Focus Entertainment, developed within the Warhammer 40k universe. So a real brand, and it's not necessarily Doom. So diving into our first modern boomer shooter was a game with only a limited amount of content. It's just 1 episode so far. There is plans to do an episode 2 and maybe even a 3 or 4, and that game is called Siren. It's an entire sci-fi overhaul of Doom 2. The summary from the developer is: the Red Ark is a habitation prototype established by the corporation beneath the surface of Mars. The site has been dark for decades. Until a few hours ago, this site and its inhabitants did not exist. It's down to you to find out what's down there. Discover, rescue, survive, run. Siren is a game that combines all of the fun and fast-paced action of Doom, but it does incorporate an extreme survival horror-like aspect to it. From its lighting, enemy design, and even just the limiting amount of ammo that you can find. A common trope within boomer shooting genre is there's always enough ammo. Heck, I could even say that about all shooter genres these days. But that's not the case in Siren. As I played Siren, I found myself dying and retrying the episode over 15 times, maybe 10, and that was just on its standard difficulty. Now, I will tell you, some of that does come from me kind of getting my first-person shooter bearings back, and even remembering that these games had a manual save function. So, the first 2 hours of my gameplay was me starting from the same autosave location, not realizing that I could have just saved and then continued forward. But I'm going to say that factors into the difficulty, because you're so used to today's gaming where everything's an autosave. This game doesn't have that. It's old school. So I don't want to spoil too much about Siren, but the developer added ideas and concepts that you don't really find from those early first-person shooters like Quake or Wolfenstein. There's an actual story developing through the game as well. From passive storytelling via found datapads or direct connections from physically talking to NPCs, to even just ambient storytelling, like discovering a mess hall infested with zombie-like creatures. So there you are thinking, wow, these people became infected during their dinner or their lunch break. The story of Siren did feel relatively simple, yet somewhat cosmic horror. There's this entity, and it's destroying this facility, and we're here to terminate everything and everyone down here. But I did find myself wanting to know more. Not just about this entity, but what the hell was going on this Mars base. I know it has that familiarity to Doom, as in it's taking place on Mars and they're doing something they shouldn't supposed to be doing, but it was something I felt missing from playing a game like Doom or Wolfenstein. In those games, we know we're there to kill some demons because an idiot opened up a portal, or we're there to kill Nazis because Nazis are the bad guys. However, I will say Siren only has 1 episode, so some of that desire for more does come from the mystery surrounding it. But overall, the combat, survival horror aspect, the jump scares, and the weapons, with their amazing sound design by the way, makes it a quick dive into modern boomer shooting in almost the perfect entryway. It's so unique, yet feels so familiar for people who grew up within that genre. So, now we're going to jump to game number 2. And this one's actually a 2-episode game, and it's called Ashes 2063. I first heard of Ashes when I just had my YouTube algorithm going, as we all probably have done at some point, and a video came on, and it was by the YouTube creator Ragnar Rocks. Ragnar dives much into this game's aesthetic and does an absolutely amazing expose on the Doom engine. I highly suggest their video on Ashes if you want a more deep dive of the game, or even just the history of Doom and the modding community. But personally, I'm here to talk about gameplay and bring my opinion and discussion if a game is worth your time. So Ashes is a post-apocalyptic setting built off the Doom engine. It's another Doom mod, but it does have like a bat file that you double click and run. It just needs to be in like a Doom 2 shareware folder. Either way, it has this Fallout-like feel to it. So you play as this scavenger and their beloved motorcycle, and you're just trying to survive and make ends meet by finding resources to sell or just doing odd jobs for whatever settlement will house you and pay you. And through these errands, you stumble upon a grander quest. It involves discovering more about the end of the world, and it leads us on this honestly crazy path to fighting super mutants, AI, and whatever's left of the US military. The game encompasses its own soundtrack, unique weapons, sound effects, and even has an entire UI conversation system that allows the player to control how much involvement they want with the world that this developer had created. And honestly, I'm not sure how I'm going to say this, because I don't mean it as a combative statement, but I've never had a bad game suggested to me by Ragnar Rocks. And I found this one via him. And honestly, it hits its mark in episode 1. But man, does it lose its way in episode 2. The game is fun, and the game is challenging. It honestly does feel like a game made with that true embodied spirit of the early 1990s. There's no hand-holding. You need to understand the quest, the mission, and really explore the location while trying to conserve ammo so you have just enough shotgun shells to punch a hole through a cannibal's skull as they jump out of a window scaring you and saying, "I'm gonna eat your liver." But my main gripe with Ashes 2063 was really, it almost did too much. Coming from Siren, I felt like there was just too many mechanics in the game for a first-person shooter. Now, I don't want anyone to think that the execution of these mechanics was bad, but the game is smooth, and everything works brilliantly. I just found myself not getting what I expected. Part of that boomer shooter charm is that feedback loop, and usually that means the action isn't stopping until you reach the end of the level button and you see all of your stats appear on the screen. These stats are the same across all different types of these shooters. And what does that mean? It means the percentage of the enemies you killed. How long did it take you to get to the end of the level? Did you get any of the secret areas? How many of those treasures did you miss? But with Ashes 2063, although it does all of those things, the areas were so big at times, with so much empty space, that I felt myself just wandering around, more than just running and gunning. Which honestly gave me this feeling of conflict. On one hand, the world was so clever and beautifully designed. I mean, I really did feel like I was running around this post-apocalyptic wasteland of the United States. But at the same time, I felt like I wasn't really playing the right game after a while. Ashes 2063 Episode 2 started introducing this open world-like mechanic for some of its earlier chapters. At first, I thought this was an amazing feat of programming and manipulation of such an old game engine. But after wandering around for a few hours to advance different stages of the questline, I started to feel that I wasn't progressing at all. This was the first eureka moment that was, this isn't the game I thought I signed up to play. And this feeling continued to perpetuate up until about the 65% mark of the game, where the end part of the story is essentially triggered. I think if I was a bigger Doom or Boomer shooter fan, I would have reveled and marveled at the just someone adding so much to an engine that I already adored. Similar to like the Warcraft 3 modding community. I mean, people made games like Dota or Life of a Peasant from an RTS game. It's just, if you go into an RTS and those are the games you end up playing, you almost feel like, hold on a second, what game did I buy? And maybe I'm being a little ridiculous or overzealous in these statements, but personally, the journey through these older shooters was nostalgic to me, right? I was too young to really be experiencing the games that my older brother and father were playing back in Doom, so that might be part of the missing link for me. So that was Ashes 2063. Now we can get into Game 3. Arguably a true modern boomer shooter, just due to the simple fact that it's developed and created on its own engine and was released within the past year. And that game was Warhammer 40,000 Boltgun. The game even states in its description, and honestly it's like this adorable trailer that they have on Steam, I highly suggest you watch it, that you get to blast your way through an explosion of sprites, pixels, and blood in the perfect blend of Warhammer 40,000's frantic gameplay and the stylish visuals of the 90s retro shooter. For Boltgun, there's going to be the obvious question. do I need to understand Warhammer 40k to play this game? And I'm going to be upfront with you. I've only recently started to delve into this Warhammer universe, and I've read a total of 2 books. And I have one friend who pings me about what I've learned so far. And the only thing Boltgun gave me was, oh, so that's what the hell that creature is supposed to look like. And outside of that realization or feeling, the game really sticks to that nostalgic mindset. It's not about Warhammer 40k, it's kind of just using it as a backdrop to make a fun boomer shooter. Obviously, if you're a Warhammer fan, the game is going to be way more engaging for you, but if you're not a Warhammer fan, you'll kind of be able to pick up who's the bad guys and why they're bad guys. The game just focuses on boomer shooter aesthetic. Enemies are in front of me, I need a colored key to open that door, and oh, would you look at this monster gun I just picked up, let's go shoot something. So it actually does feel weird to say this, but after these 3 boomer shooters, I'd say Boltgun was the closest feeling to playing some 90s FPS without booting up Doom or Duke Nukem for the 20th time in my life. The game's soundtrack of instrumental metal music, the polish of the effects, the mini cutscenes to drive the story forward, and even this literal helper that reminds you of progressing the story elements really did make me feel like I was back in the 90s and it had just been redone in the year of 2023 to 2024. So after the first 2 games, it just kept reminding me of why I liked these first-person shooter games from that era. Even the story's nonsensical progression was a nice feeling. I would miss certain dialogue pieces because they would just appear in the top left of the screen, and I was currently being accosted by about 300 nurglings, but it never really mattered. Just through the context clues and fighting my way through the hordes of monsters and Chaos Marines made me realize it didn't matter what actually was happening, I just need to kill more bad guys. One weird critique I do have for Boltgun was the music needed to be more constant and maybe even a little bit louder. The soundtrack was decent and it fit the vibe of running and gunning, but I just felt it needed to be louder and looped more. The one thing Doom and Doom 2 mastered was such a simple yet repetitive soundtrack constantly in your ears, and they even redid such a beautiful concept when they did Doom Eternal a few years ago by making it, modern metal and djenty and all that other fun stuff. The idea behind that music is it makes you want to keep shooting until it's bedtime, or you realize you haven't blinked in 2.5 minutes. I will say, though, is that this is such a minor comment, and it never really took away from the game, but it would probably be nice to have. So, without all of these commentaries and 3 completely separate games in front of you, from free to, honestly, pretty damn cheap, the main question still stands, should you play modern boomer shooters? And I think this is my first answer of meh. It's honestly situational. Boomer shooters are a lot of fun, especially from a historical context. It's what really started this whole gaming genre, and some could even argue created a lot of modern gamers and companies. But in terms of the experience, I think boomer shooters are just good, somewhat adult fun. The games are fast-paced, forgiving if you play on a lower difficulty. Most of the time they're super corey and are amazing at turning your brain off from the rest of the world. So, who are these modern boomer shooters for? I guess it goes without saying, but boomers? Easy said, easy done. But I would also say millennials and Gen Xers. And I gotta admit, I think these games really do tickle that nostalgic itch and remind us of those simpler times in games before microtransactions and deep movie-like storytelling. But these 90s inspired first-person shooters have not been remade, or a new one hasn't come out in years. So I think if you're in your 30s like me, something like Warhammer 40k's Boltgun or even Siren is gonna be right up your alley. I'd also say the game is for people looking for action. If you love games like Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, Battlefield, the Doom Resurrection games, but you don't want to be playing multiplayer or the same story mode again, I do think giving these modern boomer shooters is going to be a fun experience for you. The difficulty factor in terms of mechanically being good at the game, such as mouse movement or keystrokes per minute, it just drops dramatically. But you are going to be constantly be moving and shooting, which is going to be fun for you. So, with those being said, that's kind of a broad stroke here on who it's for, so we can now dive into who's it not for. I think the modern gamers and people who've only gotten into gaming in the past 10 years will feel these games out for their outdated style and be left disappointed. Of course, that can't be said for all people, and this is a major generalization, but the modern person who's playing games have had access to such amazing games and quality of life improvements, from user interfaces to technical challenges within games, that I think the simplistic nature could feel really boring for a lot of players, or arguably not competitive enough for them. So in that sense, I don't think the average person is going to enjoy them. The next person that it's not for is going to be story-driven gamers, and they're not going to have a good time playing these modern boomer shooters. I know I dived into a bit about Ashes 2063 having a storyline and an overarching world, but honestly, the game story is restricted by the Doom engine. I know there's some Fallout comparisons to be drawn, or even like Alien comparisons for Siren, but at the end of the day, you can only tell so much story from a game whose answer can only be told from the end of a barrel. And then the final people that the game's really not for is visual graphic enthusiasts. I don't have the best way to describe this, but although these games do a lot with their texture packs, and even Boltgun is nominated for its unique graphic style, I find these games to fall under those pixel categories of games. They can look beautiful for what they are, but at the end of the day, I don't think anyone would classify them as stunning or jaw-dropping. So although these three games are amazing in their own rights, if you are into that visual graphic aspect, these games are really not going to do anything for you. And that's honestly the best way I can guide you on your next game to choose in a list of thousands that just keeps backlogging every day. If you do love boomer shooters or have played one of these games, I'm always curious what your thoughts are, and if you agree or disagree with any of my points. At the end of the day, these are all my own commentary, and I just have fun analyzing the games that I play, and I hope to help people find the next game to enjoy in their repertoire. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a good one.